Teen Wolf. If you've never watched the show, you might assume from the title that it's just another typical teen drama, but calling Teen Wolf simply a teen drama doesn't really do justice to the world it eventually became. What started with high school life evolved into a massive fantasy universe filled with werewolves, hunters, supernatural creatures, and different mythologies. The story begins when Scott McCall is bitten by a werewolf while walking through the woods with his best friend, Stiles. Suddenly, Scott finds himself with incredible abilities. He's faster, stronger, and his senses are far more powerful than before. But these powers also come with dangers that completely change his life. At first, the story focuses on Scott trying to deal with being a werewolf while living a normal life in Beacon Hills. But as the seasons go on, the world becomes much bigger. Werewolves and hunters are only the beginning. The Kanama, the Oni, the Nogitsune, the Dread Doctors, and many other supernatural beings become part of the story. Teen Wolf starts as a simple werewolf series and slowly builds a fantasy universe of its own. One of the most interesting things about the show is that it wasn't completely original. The series was inspired by the 1985 movie of the same name. However, the show eventually went in a completely different direction. While the original movie was much more comedy-focused, the series gradually became darker and more serious. As the seasons progressed, horror and supernatural elements became much more important to the story. Another thing that made Teen Wolf stand out was the variety of creatures and mythologies it introduced. Instead of sticking to traditional werewolf stories, the show took inspiration from different cultures and legends and brought them into its own universe. The Kanima, Nogitsune, Oni, and Dread Doctors each brought something different to the story. This kept the show constantly evolving, but it also became one of its biggest weaknesses. As the universe grew, the storylines became increasingly complicated. Stiles was another major part of what made the series memorable. He started as Scott's best friend, but eventually became one of the most important characters in the entire show, despite having no supernatural powers of his own. The Nogitsune storyline in particular pushed the series into a much darker direction and became one of its most intense arcs. It also gave Dylan O'Brien one of his most memorable performances on the show. Of course, Teen Wolf wasn't perfect. The later seasons became more complicated, and some storylines felt disconnected from what came before. Major threats could be introduced and then quickly forgotten, while new creatures sometimes made previous storylines feel less important. Some characters had never received satisfying conclusions, and the final season struggled to recreate the atmosphere of the earlier ones, but it's also important to judge Teen Wolf within the context of its time. The series premiered in 2011 when television shows aimed at younger audiences rarely built fantasy worlds this large. Today, fantasy productions have much bigger budgets and more advanced visual effects, but Teen Wolf managed to create its own supernatural universe with the resources it had, combining different creatures, mythologies, and stories over the course of 6 seasons. That's why calling Teen Wolf simply a teen drama feels a little unfair. Yes, it had its flaws, and not every season was equally strong, but for its time, there weren't many shows that managed to combine high school life with such a large supernatural world and keep that universe going for so many years. In the end, Teen Wolf didn't have a perfect script. The writing stumbled at times, some decisions were questionable, and the show definitely lost some of its original atmosphere toward the end. But when you look at what it accomplished for its era, the fantasy world it created was genuinely impressive. Maybe some storylines could have been better and some characters deserved stronger endings, but you can't deny what Teen Wolf achieved. It started as a story about a teenager becoming a werewolf and grew into a universe of its own, and perhaps that's why people still remember it years later. Teen Wolf wasn't just another teen drama of its time. For its era, it was a unique fantasy world that would be incredibly difficult to replicate.